welcome to all the new faces and welcome to the recurring attendees. Very glad to see you there. Today is a special event because it's co-organized with the Belgium Kotlin user group, from which Guy is the leader too. So some of you are already part of that user group. Those who aren't yet, I invite you to register also to his group. He's also on Meetup, so quite easy to find. I have quite a few words before I leave the stage to Sebastian, but they are quite important, so I would like to have a few minutes of your attention. First of all, we are going to talk about SpringBoot and Kofu and all that, which are all open sources. And the BruJUG is more or less kind in the same way as the open source, except it's more like an open community. So what does that mean? It means that it's there for you, it's free for you, and everybody can participate and engage and be part also of the BruJUG. So how could you participate and help the BruJUG do? Well, there are some few steps you could do. Let's start with the small baby steps and easy steps that you could do. So the first one is spread the word. So I guess you all have a Meetup account. So you can go to our Meetup page, leave a review. If you have a social media account like Twitter or LinkedIn or Google+, but hurry up because it will be shut down soon. Leave a note, spread the word, and also more importantly, talk to your coworker, spread the word within your company. If you like what you heard during this presentation or during the previous presentation, invite your coworkers. And if you hate absolutely what you heard, invite your enemy. It helps us too. Something that you can do is something that Ordina did this time. Is you can ask your HR department, your marketing department, and propose to be a sponsor for the BruJUG for one event or two events or even for a year. It's really up to you, but it helps provide you food like you had today. It helps provide funding for the expenses, for the travel expenses, like we partially covered for Sebastian. So it helps us to have great speakers for you, and it also gives some visibility for your company. So it's a win-win. And just drop me a mail, contact me via Meetup. I'm easy to find if you're interested. The third part where you can help and requires a bit more involvement on your side. You can be here. And I know it's frightening. I'm frightened right now. So what we will do is we will organize in April what we did last year is that we will organize a first-time speaker session. And which means you can register and we give you the stage for 15 minutes and you can talk about anything you want. You can even sing it if you like for 15 minutes as long as it's somewhat IT related. So you can already save the date. It will be April 24th. And if you have a subject in mind, or if you like to have some tips about how to do a presentation and how to work on your slide and things like that, reach us to us, and we have some advice for you, and there will be some rewards for the more courageous of you that will propose it. So we will soon give you a forms where you can register to be one of those. And last but most important thing that you can do is fill one of those. Okay, maybe I should have put some more comfy chairs because those one doesn't really like it. Those chairs are organizer chairs. Currently, I am with Ortwin. We are both the people organizing this meeting. which means that if one of us is sick, it leaves only one person. And if one of us cannot attend, it leaves only one person. And it just happened that I had a big dilemma yesterday. Yesterday I got a bad news about my dad, just got admitted to the hospital. So I was like, okay, should I go visit him or should I be here? Right. Hopefully I have a great family and I have a lot of brothers and sisters, so they can relay and they can take the part 2 days from me. But yesterday night, this night, my kids also got it. So hopefully I have a wife that could take the relay again. But you see what I mean, I guess. Is that shit happens and I might not always be there. And it would really sadden me that we cancel such a great event if I'm the only one that cannot. So please, if you can give a bit of your time to help us organize, it doesn't have, it's not a lot of work, but it requires you to be available, to be there, to bring the hardware, to welcome the speaker, and things like that. It's not a lot, but it helps a lot. So that was for the dark note. Before I leave you the stage, just one last thing. This month we have another session, and it will be on JUnit 5, 28 January. Yeah. Okay. So that's all I have to say that's important. Now, after the talk, for those who still want or that can still stand it, we go usually to a pub nearby to continue the discussions. You're more than. Voilà, that's it for me. I leave you the stage.
Okay, thanks. Is it okay for you? Yeah? Okay. Welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Sébastien Deleuze. I work for Pivotal as a Spring Framework committer. And today we are going to talk about various topics about Spring Boot, Kotlin, and especially the Kofu DSL and the Coroutines Report. So these are pretty new things, so don't be afraid if you don't know anything about these strange words. We are going to start slowly, and we are going to basically see what are the topics currently incubated on these topics. So, Kotlin allows Java developers. Yeah. Oh, it's flickering now. You want to restart something, or we continue like that? Okay, let's try. So Kotlin allows Java developers to leverage their existing skills to write shorter, safer, and more expressive code. And also, I tend to think that it's more fun to develop with Kotlin, and we spend a lot of time developing. It's our job, but it's important to have pleasure and to have something. I mean, a language quite expressive to be able to express our ideas and algorithm. I think if there is a word that describes Kotlin, it's pragmatic. I think at Kotlin Conf this year, it was a word that was very common to describe the language. And I think it's pragmatic, but at the same time, it's a language built by people with academic background. So it's at the same time quite elegant, and it's not. It's a quite elegant language as well. So since Google has announced that Kotlin is the official language for Android, it has helped a little bit. So you can see that the Kotlin is rising, mainly because there is a lot of Kotlin, a lot of Android developers that are coming to this language, but also on server side, on front end, I don't think there is that much developers, but on server side, it begins to abstraction, and I'm here to talk about that. It's the fastest growing language on GitHub currently. And if we compare it to Scala and Groovy, yeah, it's really becoming to be much used. So it's interesting to see this kind of tendencies. If we compare that to Java, because it depends about the context. Compared to Java, Java is still far away, much more used, and I think that will remain like that on the JVM. But first, Kotlin is not only about the JVM, so there is also Kotlin native is super young, but maybe in a few years that will be interesting. There is also the front-end story, which is quite still not that usable, but that's making progress, and I think in the coming years, maybe with some WebAssembly support, that will be quite interesting. But compared to, I mean, Java will stay the leader, but now we have two major JVM languages and two major languages on the JVM, and I think that's something that's here to stay. And that's a pretty new situation because previously there was Java and the others, and now we have Java, Kotlin, and the others. Spring project provides first-class support for Kotlin. I have mostly worked on that for the 3 last years. That means Spring Framework, Spring Boot, Spring Data provide specific support for Spring, and we are adding additional support as the time passes. This is a regular Spring Boot application developed in Kotlin. So today we are going to see a lot of new and fancy stuff, but this is a regular Spring Boot application using Spring MVC and or that could use, this one is with Spring MVC. And you see that it's the same structure than with Java, but the code is shorter. You have the Kotlin type inference here. So one thing to understand for maybe those who don't know Kotlin very well, Kotlin is a statically typed language, and it is as statically typed as Java. It's even more statically typed because it has null safety, where in Java you have to guess or read the documentation to know if a method will return null or not. So it's even more statically typed than Java. And in that case, it's Kotlin type inference that will infer the type for user controller.findById based on that one. Notice also that you can, in your IDE, you can enable type ints to have the infer type displayed. So if you still want to have this type displayed without having to write it, you can enable the type ints in IntelliJ IDE that will display the types. That's pretty useful. I usually enable that. But you have, so you have null safety, you have this kind of short data classes. You can see that Kotlin favor immutable properties. And simply less code to read and less code to maintain. So this is what you can use today, and we are going to talk about the next steps if you want to use other things. But this is perfectly usable in production and supported, and you should use that if you want. I have written a detailed tutorial about that, so you can go to spring.io. You go to the guides and you search the Kotlin tutorial. You have a step-by-step tutorial. So if you know already developing a Spring Boot application in Java, just do this tutorial and you will know everything you need to know for Kotlins. You have also some links to train yourself. For example, this Kotlin counts tutorial, which is short exercise that allow you to learn the basics of Kotlin step by step. So again, if you know Java, that will allow you to have quickly a quite good understanding of the language, and you will be able to develop in Kotlin in a few days. As of Spring Framework 5 and Spring Boot 2, Spring now provides a Rackif Stack, which allow predictive scalability regardless of the latency. So if you are developing application that need to communicate with others, like in microservices, that could be interesting. If you have to deal with streams, for example, stream exchange between the network, that could be also interesting. So we have introduced a new web framework, which is Spring WebFlux, and Spring Data, Security, and Boot provide dedicated reactive support. Spring WebFlux is available in two flavors. One is using annotations. That's similar to Spring MVC that you are used to use, I guess. And there is also a new flavor, which is the functional one. So that's more close to what you can find in other languages or technology like Node.js or Ruby or this kind of thing. So this is what I guess you already know, and this is what we are going to talk today. So this is an example of the WebFlux functional router in Kotlin. So today we are going to focus on Kotlin, and the fact that Kotlin is a good, pretty advanced language is a good thing when you use functional construct. So here, instead of using @controller and @request mapping annotations, I'm going to use a DSL. So you can see this. This is declaring that we are creating a router function. A router function is a return type, and we are providing a Kotlin DSL that allows to define with this kind of syntax your routes. So you can use any kind of request predicates. You don't have to use, for example, just slash or specifying the method. You can use any kind of request predicates based on the header values, some custom condition that you will create, or just specify the HTTP methods and the path. You can use nested routes. Here, you can directly write your handler here or just use a method reference. So here, I'm using a callable reference to the item handler. And this handler, so this is a bin of type a router function, okay? But that's just a regular bin. And this is the handler. So the handler take a server request as input and will return a mono of server response. Mono is like completable future. It's a kind of asynchronous wrapper for single values from the Reactor library. And we provide an API where you can basically specify the status codes, the headers, and do various things, render views with Mustache or any kind of template libraries that is supported by Spring. You can obviously return serialize with JSON, with XML, with protobuf, with various kind of technologies. So this is currently supported, and you can totally in production with WebFlux only. It's not available with MVC, but you can use this kind of thing, and this is supported. And here we support that in production today. Okay. So now we are going to see the new stuff. And so while working on these topics, I was asking myself a few open questions. I would like open-ended questions I would like to share with you today. The first one is, could we leverage Spring Boot infrastructure with explicit configuration instead of convention and features enabled by class path detection? I mean, Spring Boot is an awesome piece of software developed by my friends and colleagues. And I think for Java and for an annotation programming model, when we do a lot of things, it's just amazing. But some people, including me, tend to like to have more control, to have simpler things. So maybe less conditions that are evaluated at startup, maybe something I control more. For example, I'm not keen on having features enabled by the class path. I mean, that's totally good in Java with annotations where we don't have a very advanced language. But with Kotlin, I was wondering if we could make things different. And maybe that could also allow Spring Boot to reach new kind of developers, because usually when developers are coming from other technologies, they are a little bit lost. And maybe we could provide with that a kind of different configuration model, which is more approachable for people coming from Go, from Node.js, from other technologies. The other question I was asking myself after drinking a few beers was, could we start Spring Boot application 50 times faster and consume 5 times less memory? The response is yes, so we will talk about that later. Could we expose WebFlux with an easy-to-use imperative API? I mean, so WebFlux is super scalable, it's super powerful, and functional programming is great, but it's not the cup of tea of everybody. And if you just want to build an asynchronous CRUD application, basically, maybe you don't need to change of programming model and you just want to have the WebFlux scalable engine, but keep your imperative programming model. So yeah, maybe we have some solution with that for that with Coroutines, for example. And that's why I ended up to create Springfoo. So Springfoo is an incubator intending to mature experimental features before inclusion in top-level Spring projects like framework, boot, data. So when something is in Springfoo, that means it's not usable yet in production. That's an incubator. Today, I'm going to explain what feature you could expect this year in production. I mean, when some features will be in framework, in boot, in Spring Data, and what feature will remain this year in the Springfoo incubator because it's too early to integrate them, and maybe some feature will be never integrated. That's a game, but that's basically what Springfoo is. And the first feature I would like to present you, and don't be afraid that after the slides I will live code something, is Kofu. So Kofu is for Kotlin and functional. It's a different model of configuration for Spring Boot. It's minimalist, efficient, and this is an explicit configuration model for Spring Boot. So you don't have auto-configuration, you don't have features that are enabled based on class path detection. You have to declare what you want to use, and I have tried to make this easy, because if you have to do a huge number of manual configuration, that's not a very good thing for you. So this is an application, a Spring Boot application configured with Kofu. So instead of using annotation, you are going to use lambdas and this kind of DSL, where you declare that web application. You have various blocks. So here is a declaration of beans. So you declare sample service and sample handler beans. You can also obviously provide some supplier where you specify the interface, and then you specify the implementation that has a different type. But here, that's just some custom sample service and sample handler. And these beans will be auto-wired, so you don't have to manually inject the parameters, okay? These beans have constructor with various parameters that will be auto-wired by type when they are instantiated. Maybe later there will be bean scanning, but for now I prefer to stay explicit. So for now you have to declare explicitly the various beans. I will explain later why. But in theory, we can do bean scanning, and scanning the class path is very fast, unlike what some could think. So it's pretty fast. So there is no issue. Yeah. For now, I prefer the explicit mode. Then we have this server block. So instead of creating a WebFlux server because Spring Boot detects that there is WebFlux on the class path, here you have to declare it. Okay. So I declare server. Here I have chosen to everything is optional, obviously. And here I have declared a port. And you can see that you can plug some statement like that, because it looks like a document, but it's code. It's Kotlin code. So I can use any kind of if statement, for loop, or any kind of custom expression. So that's where this model is pretty powerful. Also, you can put breakpoints, okay? So if you want to be sure that your server block is taken in account, you put a breakpoint here, and you can debug your configuration. Everything is discoverable in the IDE. I will show it later. This is integrating the router DSL that we have seen previously. Okay, here we are just leveraging some building blocks that are already present in Spring Framework. And the codec configuration, for example, is also manual. So if you declare nothing, I think string and resources will be supported, because that doesn't depend on any kind of libraries. But if you want Jackson, it will not pop up magically because you have Jackson on the class path. You have to explicitly declare it. And that's also true for the client. Here it's just a server, but you can declare the client with the same kind of thing. So you are in control. I try to provide some sensible default, but I don't have much opinion in the default. It's your role to declare what you want to use. I have also worked on a Java variant which is called Jafu. and Jafoo is the exact equivalent on term of feature, but for Java. So it's less readable. I won't talk much about Jafoo today because that's more verbose. And for Kotlin, I'm pretty sure, I mean, we will discuss that after the talk, and I'm also here to really get your feedback and know if you like this kind of configuration or you think it's not interesting. I'm really would like to have your advice on that, and not just the good advice, every advice, really. For Java, it's doable, but it's more verbose. You don't have Kotlin extensions, you don't have type inference, you miss a lot of features that maybe make this kind of configuration less suitable for Java, at least for now. Maybe Java will continue to evolve, will gain some features. For example, here we could use var with Java 11. But for now, I'm not sure. Maybe you have an advice and we will discuss that. But everything I will say about Kofu is also doable with Jafoo. I will maintain both DSL. It's just I prefer the Kofu variant. Okay. So with this kind of DSL, no auto configuration, no features enabled based on the class path, the developer is in control of enabling the feature she or he needs. That's what I have said previously. That's configuration as code that you can read, compose, debug, autocomplete in your IDE with full documentation. So you don't need the IntelliJ IDE ultimate to have to know if this property exists. You just have to have your basic IDE and it works because it's just code. So that's interesting also. Minimal property usage. So I hate when there is too much YAML or too much properties. So in this model of configuration, mostly the biggest part of the configuration is code, and only the part that will change based on your environment will be properties, or you can just use environment variables if you want. But in Spring Boot, we do mainly advanced configuration with adbins, okay, to override some things, but that's quite advanced usage. And we still have a lot of properties to define some behavior that are common to all environments. In this model, we will just use properties for the things that change between environments. What is common is always as code. That's the best practice in this kind of model. So this is leveraging Spring Boot infrastructure. So I'm not here to reinvent the wheel. So really, I'm using most of the Spring Boot infrastructure, but just in a different philosophy, a different arrangement. And it's using functional bin registration, which is a new feature of Spring Framework 5. In Spring Framework 4, there was two ways of registering bins, XML, the old one, and Java config, which is heavily used by Spring Boot. And Spring Framework 5 introduced functional bin registration, which is just using lambdas to register bins. So basically you provide a supplier and Spring is using that as a factory. And it appears that it is the most efficient way to register bins by far. So because it's just super simple, it's just low-level Spring API with Lambda, so that's pretty efficient. And Springfoo and Kofu and Jafoo are based on this functional way of registering bins, so that's pretty fast. A very important thing is that it is, and one of the main advantage, it's provide modular configuration. Maybe I hesitate to rename that as module, but maybe I will do a poll at the end. So the idea is that you create various configurations. So here I'm going to show you an example with data configuration and web configuration. So data config will contain all the elements that are related to the persistence part. So here I'm only declaring the bins for the repository part. I'm specifying a listener. So again, that's a regular Spring listeners with application ready event from Spring Boot. Okay, and here we use that to initialize the repository. Here I'm declaring the persistence. So yeah, so this is R2DBC. So we are going to see a lot of new shiny stuff today. So R2DBC is a project we have been working for the last month. It's a Reactive SQL with support for H2, PostgreSQL, SQL Server, and others are coming. and it's it's a kind of reactive version of JDBC. There is another project from Oracle which is ADBA, but ADBA is more for asynchronous SQL. It's not reactive. They are not keen on going reactive. Maybe that will change, and maybe we will join efforts later. Not sure, but currently they are not really pushing for the reactive part. So we have decided to move forward, and maybe later we will work together. So, and this is coming with Spring. Nope. So it is not anymore experimental. So we have removed the experimental mention from the GitHub repositories, and that means we are working on a release version. For now, we have the first. We have the 6 or 7 R2DBC milestones, which R2DBC really is a low-level stuff. Okay, JDBC is a little bit strange because it's at the same time a low-level API and an end-user API, and I think that's why there is some issues with JDBC. R2DBC is really a very small SPI, which is super low level. Nobody will use that directly, but that's just database vendor or us that will implement specific support for a specific database. And on top of that, there is consumers of this Reactive SQL library. So for now, we have Spring Data R2DBC, which is end user level API that we expose for that. And I'm pretty sure we are going to see various libraries in Kotlin world or outside Spring world that will consume that. But R2DBC is really very, very small, only in dependency on reactive streams, basically. And a production-ready version are coming, I guess, later this year, maybe a little bit after, but I would say this year, but no promise. But that's our goal, yes. Yeah. 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 So this is for the data configuration. For the web configuration, same story. We declare the bins that are specific to the web part. Notice that there is a new feature that I will also add to Spring Framework 5.2, which is automatic wiring of. I have not shown the routes. I should have. Routes have various parameters, various handlers, and here the parameters of the method reference here are automatically auto-wired by type. So and without any reflection because that's just using Kotlin type system. Creating bins using functions, pure functions, is coming in Spring Framework 5.2, and here I'm using that to automatically auto-wire the parameters to be able in my routes to be able to use the various handlers. So that's pretty interesting. So we have these two configurations, and then we have the application where we integrate this. So I'm using enable, like the @enable thing. Okay, we are enabling this configuration or this module. Not sure what name I will use. And the nice thing is that if I have an integration test where I want to do things a little bit different, I create another application that will just integrate the data configuration and the properties, and that's it. And it's doable in Spring Boot with slices, okay? So you have the web and the data slices, but here you can define any kind of granularity. I mean, I have chosen for the sake of example to just use data and web configuration, but you can create your own granularity of configuration and assemble them here and easily create some integration test or just test a subsystem. And that's pretty interesting because since we don't have any kind of generic global configuration based on ClassPath or other things, we are really in control of what we enable. I think that enables a much more fine-grained configuration of your Spring Boot application, and that gives you the control of doing more focused tests. Kofu is faster because it enables only the features you need and leverage functional bin registration. So yeah, I think a Spring Boot application with Kofu is faster. We are going to see the figures later. And there is really two reasons. The first one is that because functional bin registration is just faster than Java config. It's just pure lambdas and very, very low level. And the other reason is that since you are in charge of declaring what you need, there is no feature that are enabled by default that you don't need. For example, in a regular Spring Boot application, I will have some caching, some scheduling features that are enabled by default, GMX. If you don't care, they will be here, and you will likely forget to disable them explicitly, and that's expected. Here, if you don't enable a feature, it will not be enabled, so that's why your application starts faster and consume less memory, because you only activate what you need, the codecs you need, the features you need. So I have tried to measure the improvement. So this is the startup time of Mixit. So I'm an organizer of a Mixit conference in France in May this year in Lyon. And we have a website which is developed with SpringBoot 2, Kotlin, and the functional API, because I have developed it 2 years ago. And I tried to evolve this application with the latest feature I developed. So this is a WebFlux reactive MongoDB application, okay, with several controllers, rendering of mustache template, etc. But this is a real production website, non-trivial application, so this is not an hello world. So it starts in 2.5 seconds, okay, with Spring Boot 2.0. You can notice that just by upgrading to Spring Boot 2.1, it will start faster, okay? So if you have some application with Spring Boot 1.5 or 2.0, should maybe upgrade to 2.1 because that will just consume less memory and start faster for free. And we are also working on Spring Boot 2.2, which will go faster even if you stay with the annotation, Java config, etc. We have a lot of places where we can optimize things, and we are doing a lot of work to optimize performances also for the annotation programming model. So all the shiny stuff I'm presenting today have also the goal to improve the regular Spring Boot application based on annotation, because basically that gives us an idea. So we are starting the exact same features with in 1.1 second, so that's a pretty big increase, and the memory is much lower. And the interesting thing is that gives us an idea about how fast and how little memory we can consume with Spring Boot by optimizing the infrastructure, basically. So this kind of functional variant will be always faster because we evaluate less condition, we do less stuff. But if we do more things at compile time, for example, if we optimize the GC pressure and things like that, we have a potential to be between these two for Spring Boot 2.2 and the next, and improving the performance. I mean, starting faster, consuming less memory is a focus for us currently. So even if you stay with the current programming model, you will see some improvement, but yeah, it will be hard to beat this functional variant, obviously. But if you want to go even faster, there is another side of the story. So Kofu and Jafu allows to run Spring applications as native executables via GraalVM with instant startup and low memory consumption. So GraalVM is a strange beast. It's an alternative VM project. So it was R&D, and this year it's becoming a real Oracle product. And Oracle is working for 7 years now on this project. This is an alternative VM where Oracle has tried to replace some part of the current VM which are developed in C. They are developing that now in Java to be able to maintain it, because this is very old C code that nobody wants to touch anymore. And this is a big issue for them to being able to evolve the GVM. So GraalVM provides a lot of things. One thing is a new generation virtual machine. The other thing is a polyglot support. So basically it allows to call JavaScript from Java and in the other way, and support various bridge between various languages. And the last feature, which is, in my opinion, the most interesting, is that it allows to compile JVM applications to native executable like in Go. So that sounds a little bit crazy, but that's working, in fact. That's working in some cases. So we are going to talk about the details. So I want to be clear for me, because there is a lot of buzz around GraalVM, etc. So GraalVM for me is totally GraalVM native images. Okay. The other part of GraalVM are production ready, pretty sure. But GraalVM native images won't be production ready before maybe 2 years, something like that. I mean, that's my point of view, and I think a lot of people share that point of view, even if Oracle is saying, yeah, GraalVM is ready, it's 1.0, it's almost 1.0. I think GraalVM native images are a big game changer, but it's super early, and they need to fix a lot of bugs, improve support for various parts of the ecosystem, and also the Java ecosystem need to evolve to support GraalVM. That's just a new way to run Java applications. So Netty, Log4j, Spring, any kind of library need to evolve to support that as another running platform. That's not a big surprise. But so I don't say that's usable now, but I really think that will matters if Oracle don't. I mean, the technical part is super promising. I'm not sure yet what will be the product side. I mean, how there is GraalVM Community Edition, the Enterprise Edition, and what could prevent GraalVM for being successful. In not the technical side, I think it will take time, but that will be successful. But maybe GraalVM Community Edition will be not usable at all for any kind of production workload. And then GraalVM Enterprise Edition will be quite expensive. And okay, so I'm mainly afraid about that side. So I hope Oracle will do clever things and make GraalVM Community Edition usable for various use cases, and just provide maybe a boost of performance, a boost of monitoring, some enterprise features, and that's totally okay for them to make money. But yeah, I hope the community edition, the free community edition, will be usable for production. So with GraalVM, that allows us to start Spring Boot in 6 milliseconds, and we are going to see that in a demo to be sure I'm not lying. It's consuming, I mean, it's consuming 50 megabytes of 50 megabytes of RAM. So compared to with a regular JVM, it's not just about the heap. If you take all the kind of memories that a JVM consumes on a container, it's usually, even for a very small app, more than 500 megabytes just for the JIT cache, for example. So it's a pretty big difference. It's in theory it's going slower because you don't have JVM that will dynamically optimize your code when it's running. But in practice, they are also able to do a pretty clever optimization at compile time. And so I have no real bench to provide you, but I tend to think the performance will be almost the same. I mean, it will depend on some use case. I think for stream processing, when you use the stream APIs, they are much faster because they do some kind of optimization. For other workloads, they may be slower. Also, it's still very young, so performance will evolve. But I don't know that performance throughput will be a big issue in long term. I think they are already pretty fast, and even if in theory that's not true, in practice that's it. And the last topic before the demo, we are going to see a lot of new technologies, is coroutines. So coroutines are Kotlin lightweight threads that allow to write non-blocking code in a kind of imperative way. So the goal is to, so it's similar, not exactly similar, but if you have heard about Coroutines or async await in .NET or even in JavaScript, that's this kind of thing where you can write asynchronous code without having the callback L and without having reactive APIs. So it's a kind of trade-off to write asynchronous code. And coroutines. So in Java we have regular threads, but threads are limited. I mean, it consumes some memory, it consumes some CPU, and you have a limited number of threads that you can create. That's why asynchronous and reactive runtime scale much better. And you can basically create a huge number of coroutines without consuming too much memory. So that's why I call them lightweight threads. You can create several hundred of thousands coroutines. It's okay. So that's a big difference. So this is a R2DBC repository with a Reactive API. So you can see that. So that's R2DBC, but that's would like mainly to focus on the return type. So here you can see that count is returning a mono of int, so kind of completable future of int in regular world. Find all is returning a flux of users. Find one is returning a mono of users. So you can see that even if we don't return any results, we need to have a signal to know where when the method have completed. Basically, that's event based. So I use this mono void to have the complete signal or the error signal if there is an error. So and you can see that that's another way to write your code. I mean, it's not bad. It's just different. It's functional. It's a declarative approach where you describe the operation that will basically be processed in the reactive pipeline. But what is sure is that it's different from imperative code that you are used to write, and it adds some wrappers to your types. So that's not a free lunch. I mean, it will also you will have mono and flux or flow if you are using Eric Java in all your application where you deal with I/O. So that's impacting your design. But at the same time, it's super powerful. You have a bunch of operators that allow to do pretty powerful stuff. And when you are really dealing with latency and streams and this kind of stuff, that's super powerful. So the coroutine version is that one. So you can see that here we are using the regular types that we are using in the blocking world. So you can see ints. I will talk about that one later. This is a nullable user, so find one will return null when it returns no users, or user when there is one user. Here there is not anymore mono void, so you can see that and in terms of code, you can see that you are just calling the various methods. It's closer to what you are used to use in the blocking world. This one is a bit special because JetBrains advertise coroutine as final in Kotlin 1.3. That's wrong. The coroutines are stable at the language level, and if you deal with just suspendable function, okay? Yeah, because I have forgotten to talk about that. So these are returning int, user, nothing, string, etc. But these are suspending functions. So here we are declaring this method as suspendable, and the language will take care about not blocking these calls. And so instead of using some wrappers here, I'm just declaring this method as suspend, and I'll use regular return types. And so the API for suspendable function, the count, the int of ints, for example, these ones are final, that's okay. But as soon as you are dealing with channels or multiple results, it's still experimental. So you have, for example, the receive channel abstraction, which allow to deal with hot streams, for example. This is an API that will totally change in the next month. And here, the source is the upcoming abstraction that will be common to hot and cold streams, because currently coroutines only support hot streams. So with receive channel, it's only hot streams. So that's, for example, you will listen tweets, for example, or any kind of events where you subscribe and you begin to listen the events, and then you unsubscribe. But the events will be emitted before you subscribe and also after. Okay, where code streams are more, I would say, asynchronous iterables, where you you have a fixed size of element and you want to consume everything and you don't want to miss any of these, but you want to be able to consume them without waiting that all the events are returned. So instead of there should be suspend here. That's a mistake. But currently we have to use suspend of list of users. So that's collected. You collect the list and you return it asynchronously. But the issue is that you have to wait to have all the elements before returning the list. And so in the upcoming month, we will have, I'm not sure if source will be the name, but Roman Elizarov is working on that, and we will have a specific type to be able to express cold streams, which are asynchronous iterables, basically. So if you want to use coroutines with Spring, I advise you to wait. I'm currently developing the official support. And this part, the coroutines report, will be in Spring Framework 5.2 and SpringBoot 2.2. So this is a part which is currently incubated in Springfoo that will be in Spring Framework and Spring Data during this year. But for now, yeah. That's up to you. Yeah. And that's perfectly fine. So yeah, you will have the choice. I think for scalar values, like when you return a single value, that's pretty nice to be able to not use any kind of wrapper and use this kind of syntax, and that's a perfect use case for coroutines. For returning multiple users, there is less values to use coroutines, and reactive is perfectly fine. So you are totally, and that's, I'm currently working on the design, so I'm not sure yet, but at least on the web part and maybe also for the data part, I think the API will provide both capabilities with an await prefix to be able to call the coroutines alternative. I'm really working on that this afternoon, so it's not fixed, and I will ask feedbacks. But indeed, for multiple results between a specific type like source and a specific type like flux, it's up to you. But I think that will impact. I mean, just in terms of return types, that don't change anything, but in terms of codes, the implementation will be more like that for the consumers, basically, of the return value. So I still tend to think that people will use coroutines or reactive, not mixing the two paradigm with the same API. But that's really up to you, and you can do that if you want. Yeah. Interoperability between the two is already available, so that's part of the coroutines. So coroutines have a small part at the language side and a big part on the library side. There is a Kotlin X.reactor support, which is leveraging the Reactive stream interoperability, and I'm currently using that for the interop. I will contribute a new feature, which is interoperability between reactor context and coroutine context, because that's a feature that both technologies have, and that will allow to do transactions in the reactive world, because on R2DBC we do transaction on reactive side, and that's only possible with context. At least you can have some workarounds with Eric Java, but that's less clean. And that's also usable for security, for this kind of features. So with interoperability between reactor context and coroutine context, you should be able to get these features working also with coroutines. But the interop is already working, but Roman Elizarov is going to rewrite a lot of things, because the introduction of this cold stream abstraction is basically changing all the channel API. So yeah, really all the channel API will change, and even Roman don't know the scope yet. But it should be available. I mean, I have highlighted that as the most critical features for us. And obviously, Spring support for coroutine is a big thing for JetBrains. So I think they will provide us in time the required abstraction. So you will have the choice. I mean, so if you prefer reactive, that's perfectly fine. If you prefer coroutines, that's perfectly fine. We will provide the choice for both. my advice is that it depends on the use case. So sorry, I have no. But I mean, if you are just developing a basic CRUD application that want to scale, coroutines are perfectly fine, especially if you are on Kotlin. And if you want to do more advanced things, because when you do just things like that, coroutines are perfect. But when you do advanced things, not very advanced, but when you really deal with latency, with timeout, with merging strategy, with zip operators, things like that, the code is sometimes simpler with functional approach. So it's you will see, but both will be supported. And the important point is that we just consider coroutine as another API, another asynchronous API, like we support Eric Java, like we support. I mean, we have a core developed with Reactor, but we expose that. We support completable future. We support adapting to Eric Java, and here we are going to adapt to coroutines. And we are missing this cold stream abstraction, but with that, that's just another way of exposing WebFlux API. So we leverage all our current infrastructure, and that's just another way to expose it to you. And I tend to think that we have a lot of optimization currently ongoing on Reactor, etc. And I tend to think that the reactive implementation may be faster than a native coroutine implementation, because we do some optimization that coroutines can do at the engine level. So we will see that with the benchmark later. But so coroutines report is coming in boot 2.2 time frame. I hope so. Should be fine, but we'll do my best. On Spring WebFlux, for the functional side, that's sure. For the annotation side, I'm not sure, so no promise. Spring Data MongoDB Reactive will have these coroutine wrappers, and Spring Data R2DBC, so you will have coroutines SQL libraries without thread pools to hide GDBC or something like that. So, okay, so it's time for the demo. So I'm going to I'm going to create a new SpringBoot project, but I'm going to use Kofu DSL to configure it. Okay, so the important things to understand is that it's a regular SpringBoot project. So here I'm using the wizard integrated in IntelliJ IDE, but you can use start.spring.io to do that. That's the same. I'm using Kotlin Demo Kofu. I'm going to add the reactive web starter. Okay, so this is a regular Spring Boot project, and we are going to use Kofu instead of the annotation programming model. So we are going to add the dependencies. to 0 instance, if you want instant startup or consuming less memory because you want your application run cost less, basically. That's an interesting option for the long term. So we wait. I think it's 1 minute or a little bit more to compile a regular Spring Boot application, a simple Spring Boot application, I would say. And okay. And so we have this executable here, okay? You have an option to generate it statically linked. So like Go, you can generate something which has even no dependency on libc, etc. And when you run it, you start Spring Boot in 10 milliseconds. I'm going to show you that it's working for real. Okay, that's a basic application, but just to show you, it's working. It's even working with R2DBC. So I am currently able to make working R2DBC, WebFlux, Jackson, etc. So we have pretty comprehensive stack that is working. But that will take time to have that without all the reflection configuration. But I'm pretty sure that will be possible. I see no blocking point. I'm working on that. Mostly on the incubation side, but I also do some improvement in Spring Framework. I'm also discussing with the GraalVM team to improve their support for the logging, for the class path, for classes that are not in the class path. So we are doing great progress, and I think we will be able to support that at some point. Just finishing the presentation. So in terms of roadmap, so we have seen a lot of things today. So in terms of roadmap, and there is no promise. This is, in theory, our plan. So Spring Boot 2.2, which will be here middle of this year. Our focus is working on faster startup and less memory consumption. Even by using annotations, we can go faster. We have quite a lot of optimization ongoing. It's already quite optimized, but we have found some ways of being more efficient, and that will be the biggest focus of Spring Boot 2.2. Coroutine official support will be part of the story if I finish that in time, and I think that will be okay, I hope at least. We would like to add support for the Gradle Kotlin DSL in start.spring.io, and you can also expect other changes on start.spring.io, but no detail for now. And I hope we will be able to provide configuration properties on immutable data classes to avoid this horrible trick I have shown you just before. The Kofu and the Jafu side will continue to incubate because that's too early to move forward on that. That's just another configuration model for Spring Boot, so that raises a lot of silly questions and in terms of maintainability, and that's a whole configuration model that is different. So currently, that will continue to incubate this year. GraalVM native image support is not for production right now, but I think that's pretty promising, and our goal is really to support GraalVM native image as an official way of running Spring applications. And we are working on that, even that will take maybe a little bit more time. But I see no blocking point, and I think that will be pretty interesting. And we are going to integrate also the blocking stack in Springfoo. So we have actually Ariane Putzma, which has worked on the WebFlux functional API, has already created a functional version of Spring MVC. It's in a branch currently, and we are going to incubate that in Springfoo shortly to provide a blocking stack. That may be interesting later also when Project Loom will be available and will make basically Spring MVC asynchronous, not reactive, but asynchronous. So that's mainly why I would like to work on that for now to prepare Project Loom arrival. And with that, I'm not sure I will integrate, for example, GPA for now, but I mean, Spring Data, JDBC will be perfectly fine. That's a kind of lightweight approach. which is quite efficient. So we'll see. And so this is a personal opinion. I would like this a la carte configuration mode officially supported in a future Spring Boot release. There is no decision on that. I really would like to have feedbacks. How do you find this mode interesting or not? And I mean, I'm totally convinced. Not everybody is convinced yet in the boot team or generally. I mean, some people find this interesting, some not. It's not going to replace auto-configuration. Auto-configuration is perfectly fine, but my fight is more to get this as another way of configuring Spring Boot, more simple, more explicit. You have more control on what you get, and I'm curious to hear your feedback on that. Thank you. So I'm available to answer to your questions. Just a quick poll, and don't raise the hand if you are not convinced. Who finds this model of configuration interesting? If you can raise your hand. Okay, thanks. Any question, remarks?
How are you implementing the Kofu DSL? You somehow generate?
I don't generate.
Like go one by one?
Yeah, I can show you quickly. But the idea is that currently there is an adapter. So if I go to here. No, excuse me. Okay, so for now, the DSL part is written by hand by me because it's specific to the language, and I have currently no way to. I mean, we could imagine later maybe generating that from a common source, but we are not here yet. Currently, I have this auto-configure adapter, which basically have a dependency on Spring Boot auto-configure and transform the auto-config and expose it as an application context initializer. So here, I'm reusing the auto-configuration classes to basically translate that in a functional mode. So we have found a way to automatically generate that from Spring Boot auto-configure. So if I don't remember where it is, but this is Spring init from Dr. DevSire. So this is a project. Spring init is a project which basically it's an annotation processor that transforms Spring Boot auto-configure to functional bin registration automatically. And that's in the next version of Springfoo, I'm going to delete the Springfoo adapter, the Spring Boot adapter module, and I'm going to use this automatically generated functional version. That way, for the low-level stuff, we don't have to maintain anything. We are just using the same basis. Maybe later we will have a common basis in Spring Boot that could be used in auto-configure mode and functional mode, but that's long-term. That's an open question that we are currently discussing. But the idea is that it should be flexible enough for both modes, and some condition will remain. I mean, for example, registering a bin only if such bin don't exist for a specific type should remain, but for example, the condition on the class path should not be the same. So we need to make this configurable enough to fulfill both needs, and that's what I'm going to work on after the Coroutines report. So, but we have a way to generate that automatically. The DSL currently is just an API that we write. Maybe at some point we could generate Jafu from Kofu. I don't know. Every option is possible, but but minimizing the level of duplication, making that easier to configure is something that we really care. And there is various options, but yeah, that will take some time. But that's at least removing the reusing directly something that is generated from SpringBoot configure is something that is coming this month or next month. So. Other questions? No questions? Are you afraid? Okay, well, thank you. Thanks a lot.